This is De-oppressing the Marginalized Literary Canon podcast. I am Azinza.
And I am Tlatoani.
In each episode, we choose one book from a non-white author to read, discuss, and analyze.
In this episode, you will hear us read quotes from and discuss the novel Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates, published by Spiegel and Grau in 2015.
Specifically, how do I live free in this black body? It is a profound question because America understands itself as God's handiwork. But the black body is the clearest evidence that America is the work of men. Page 12.
Before we read the quotes that we've selected from Between the World and Me, what would you like the audience to know about either the text or the author or the ideas in the text before they hear the text or the quotes?
I think my goal in us not only reading the text but also interacting with the ideas within the text is less about looking at it from the perspective of a person of color and seeing the text as disempowering, and more so taking the text for what it is, giving Coates an opportunity to share his voice and share his perspective. And I think respecting someone's perspective comes with taking the time to say, I'm going to interact with your ideas and think about it and think about what you're saying in terms of the discrimination or the prejudice or the other forms of, prejudice in your life that you feel has kept you questioning like your role in society. And so I think, they're not to say that as a teacher, as someone who teaches, there are, he's directly calling out teachers. And did I read it immediately and be like, whoa, like at first glance, you want to be like, hey, I don't agree, but I have to stop and be like, well, what role do I play? It has nothing to do with my color, but more so, I'm a teacher. I'm an institution that teaches. What role do I play? So I think what I just want them to know is like the ideas and the text that we're reading is less about disagreeing and me pushing back and me having a debate, but more so about interacting with the ideas to see what we want to do with that. I don't know. How about you?
I would like to say that the discussion that we're going to have after the quotes, I'm not going to look to identify the parts of what Coates says that I disagree with. So I don't agree with everything that Coates says, but I'm not going to focus on what I don't agree with. And specifically, what is in the everyday conversation of people in the US is that when you bring up how institutions have power over our individual lives that we can only resist or try to fight against, but usually we are overpowered or it's a battle to not allow them to have influence over our lives. When you bring up this conversation, people always try to focus on what you do have power over. They'll immediately talk about what you do have power over without seeking to acknowledge how institutions have power over us all. And for that reason, I want to let's look at what Coates is saying about institutions and how they have power over us, and let's analyze that. Not because that's what I favor the most, but because people really cringe and shy away from talking about that. They really want to believe that they have all this power over their lives. And anytime, also specifically, when Black people talk about what institutions have power over Black the Black community in the US. White people or other people who don't have the experience of being the most oppressed people in the country like to say, oh, it's they like to focus on, oh, is that, do you wear those shoes because the institutions tell, something trivial, something nonsensical in terms of everybody wants to insist that Black people have power over all the institutions in the US. So because everyone is always trying to say that, I would rather focus on, let's look at what Coates says in terms of how institutions have power over all people in the US. And yeah, I would seek to flesh that out. And aside from that, I think, oh, and maybe one other thing, when I speak to educated readers, they love to say, I don't need everything described. I can analyze it for myself. But I think this is dishonest. I think this is intellectually dishonest. Because if you look at, let's say, Chinua Achebe's critical analysis of Joseph Conrad, he points out that Conrad is racist, and very racist against Africans. But meanwhile, people who love Conrad, white people, and whatever, probably some random Black scholar that somebody can cite and be like, this Black scholar doesn't think he's racist, therefore Chinua Achebe is wrong. So he pointed out that he's racist, and still the people that love Conrad insist that he's not, even though clearly he is. So white people do not infer or understand everything and analyze it on their own when the words aren't there. Even when it's explicitly written, they still don't understand. So when they do not understand this and they're saying, oh, I understand, don't write it all in the text, I think that's a lie. It's intellectually dishonest. And so if anybody has a complaint about Coates saying too much or hitting, describing it over and over and over again, I think even with, nobody's been able to describe it enough in order for the white majority in America to understand by reading a text to infer, oh, I see how we're unjust. Let's go ahead and change these social institutions. Let's go ahead and change the education system. Let's go ahead and desegregate schools. Nobody's done it yet. So until they do it, I am unconvinced that the white reader can understand, let's say, Coates' text by inferring everything on their own. Mm-hmm. And I think that is, maybe keep that in mind when reading Coates yourself.
All right.
And now for the quotes. These are the quotes from Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. 1. I tell you now that the question of how one should live within a Black body, within a country lost in the dream, is the question of my life, and the pursuit of this question, I have found, ultimately answers itself. Page 12.
2. The streets were not my only problem. If the streets shackled my right leg, the schools shackled my left. Failed to comprehend the streets, and you gave your body now. But failed to comprehend the schools, and you gave your body up later. I suffered at the hands of both, but I resent the schools more. Page 25.
Number 3. I came to see the streets and the schools as arms of the same beast. One enjoyed the official power, while the other enjoyed its implicit sanction. Those who failed in the schools justified their destruction in the streets. The society could say, he should have stayed in school, and then wash its hands of him. Page 33.
4. No one directly proclaimed that schools were designed to sanctify failure and destruction, but a great number of educators spoke of personal responsibility in a country authored and sustained by criminal irresponsibility. Page 33.
5. And you know now, if you did not know before, that the police departments of your country have been endowed with the authority to destroy your body. It does not matter if the destruction is the result of an unfortunate overreaction. It does not matter if it originates in a misunderstanding. It does not matter if the destruction springs from a foolish policy. Sell cigarettes without the proper authority and your body can be destroyed. Resent the people trying to entrap your body and it can be destroyed. The destroyers will rarely be held accountable. Turn into a dark stairwell and your body can be destroyed. Mostly, they will receive pensions. Page 9.
The enslaved were not bricks in your road, and their lives were not chapters in your redemptive history. They were people turned into fuel for the American machine. Page 70.
7. You cannot forget how much they took from us and how they transfigured our bodies into sugar, tobacco, cotton, and gold. Page 71.
8. The problem with the police is not that they are fascist pigs, but that our country is ruled by majoritarian pigs. Page 79.
9. The officer who killed Prince Jones was black. The politicians who empowered this officer to kill were black. Many of the politicians, many of them twice as good, seemed unconcerned. Page 83.
All my life, I'd heard people tell their black boys and black girls to be twice as good, which is to say, except half as much. These words would be spoken with a veneer of religious nobility, as though they evidenced some unspoken quality, some undetected courage, when in fact all they evidenced was the gun to our head and the hand in our pocket. Page 91.
11. But part of what I know is that there is the burden of living among dreamers, and there is the extra burden of your country telling you the dream is just, noble, and real, and you are crazy for seeing the corruption and smelling the sulfur. Page 106.
12. For their innocence, they nullify your anger, your fear, until you are coming and going, and you find yourself inveighing against yourself. Black people are the only people who, really inveighing against your own humanity and raging against the crime in your ghetto, because you are powerless before the great crime of history that brought the ghettos to be. Page 106.
13. To awaken them is to reveal that they are an empire of humans and, like all empires of humans, are built on the destruction of the body. Page 143.
14. I do not believe we can stop them, Samori, because they must ultimately stop themselves. Page 151.
15. And still I urge you to struggle, but do not struggle for the dreamers. Page 151. From the quotes that we read from different pages, we see that Ta-Nehisi Coates continues to talk about the school system and the streets and that they are connected, whereas people would not see them as connected normally. And for me, what I think Coates is doing and what people are missing when they read it, or at least from what I read in reviews of his book, is that Coates is trying to, and this is my opinion, present how the institutions are interconnected and how also they have the forms that they do now because they have been structured that way throughout American history to show that black people are oppressed by all of these different institutions in different ways, and they work to oppress them in one way or another. And not that it means that black people never succeed at all, that 100% of black people fail. But what he is aiming at specifically is that these institutions and how they're structured cause black people to succeed at lower rates, or cause black people to go to prison at higher rates. So it causes them to do a little bit worse, and also when they succeed to not do as well. So it's about percentage increase and decrease. Whereas it seems like reviewers, to me, of his book tried to focus more on this is disempowering because you're blaming everything on white people as though they have that much power over black people and the black body, which I think is missing the idea of increasing and decreasing rates that are caused by institutions. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's almost like I think of like a game, like a board game, and a group of people are playing a board game, and let's say it's like if they're a group of four, two of the people are losing, and they say, "I'm losing because of the piece I have to play." But no matter how many times they change the pieces, they still are losing. They're still not gaining any kind of success in the game. Later, you realize, oh, wait a minute, let's look at the rules of the game. Let's look at the structure of the game, and to realize that that's what's causing it. So in the same way that Coates is saying, let's look, in my opinion, he's saying, let's look less at the specifics and more at the bigger picture. The game is rigged. The game is set up so that people of color essentially are going to end up losing no matter how hard they try, because we're missing the bigger picture. So that kind of adds on to what you were saying.
Do you have another idea on this?
Can you just pause for a second?
So when Coates is speaking about feeling that one of his legs was shackled by the schools, and that failing in the schools sanctifies your destruction in the streets, and that society can wash their hands of a person and say, it's his fault because he didn't succeed in school. What I think many people who read this book think when they read that is that he is conjecturing, that he is simply stating a feeling. Whereas you, as a teacher, and a teacher that went through a program that emphasizes social justice, you know that what he is touching on is something that is real, that is tangible, that has been measured, has been studied, and continues to be measured and continues to be studied. And one manifestation is the achievement gap, and what causes the achievement gap, and also how it relates back to separate but unequal schools that was made illegal by Brown versus Board of Education. And that even though the schools were supposed to integrate because it's illegal to have segregated schools, that Supreme Court cases like Milliken versus Bradley upheld that citizens can keep segregated societies and therefore segregated schools, even though Brown versus the Board of Education said that separate schools mean or equal unequal schools. So can you elaborate on the actual facts of how schools are unequal that Coach is talking about?
I think the first thing that comes to mind about the lack of equality in schools is, if anything, starting with the teacher or the human being themselves, like in the school system. And so one of the things that was very prominent or stuck out to me the most about the program I came from was character analysis, looking at who we are as individuals and how does who we are, where we come from, how our life kind of mapped out, how does that influence our teaching? And whether or not you realize at a surface level that you're doing certain things or you're treating kids a certain way or you're leading a discussion a certain way, those or the ways that you in which you do that is heavily, influenced by your social location. And you can, and I've been around people who can deny up and down, and you can say with all, like, and actually Coach touches on this, you can say that you have good intention, but intention is not enough until you critically reflect and look at, well, what do I bring? And so to bring it back to the original point that I wanted to make is, on one level, you have teachers, and I've sat in meetings and I've heard and I've listened to people speak that a lot of what they say demonstrates an internal bias that they have against young people of color. That's like the first thing. And the thing is, and not the first thing, but the thing is, the teacher is kind of dictates the rhetoric that goes on in the classroom. What the teacher says, how the teacher influences the kids, how the teacher encourages them, whether or not the teacher gives their stamp of approval or disapproval and says this is good work or this is bad work, heavily influences these kids. Even if they don't remember who it was, they remember the feeling of feeling like a failure, feeling like they can't do more, feeling like they can't succeed. And so that's one way that, um, you know, I can understand why Coach says, like, he felt like the schools were shackling, his one leg or one part of who he is. Because what a teacher does in the end is they say, well, I did everything I could. I supported this kid. I told him to study. I told him to come to class every day. They skipped school. They skipped class. They chose not to come to the meetings. Their parents weren't involved. X, Y, and Z. And so if that kid doesn't graduate and pursue anything in life, well, I can dust my hands off. That's not my problem. I did my part. I did my job. Instead of actually saying, well, what role did I play? Did I do enough? If I look back at a video of me teaching and I look at the language that I use and the way I interact with the student and the way I talk to the student, did I do enough in order to kind of help that student internalize the fact that they can kind of move, even if it's at a slow, move into a different social location, did I give them what they need to basically feel like, okay, I can do more than what I'm doing? Because for kids, it seems especially kids of color, it's very untangible. They can't see beyond their 10th grade year in the classroom getting straight C's, D's, and F's. So that's one aspect of it. But
yeah, I think when you're talking about social location, so coming from an economics point of view, the society is constantly washing their hands of the destruction of Black people. So, and also the curriculum, let's say the way a teacher that has bias against Black children or children of color will teach, they teach to where the social location is of white students or affluent students. And so they figure the other students who are not in the same location, they just have to learn it, no matter where they are, instead of analyzing where are these students of color, where is their location, where is their economic location, where is their educational location, what is the education of their parents. They're not trying to meet them where they are in terms of when this kid goes home, they're not going to have the ability to have their parent help them with the homework. Mm-hmm. Maybe they have a single parent. And so instead of saying, let me figure out how to help this child who has a single parent who works all the time and will not be able to have help with what their writing assignment is, instead of actually trying to help them, they say that's their parents' fault. The white child who does have two parents at home who are going to help this child with their essay.
Or write their essay for them.
Or write their essay for them. Or when they plagiarize and you catch them plagiarizing, they're going to say, come on, it's not that serious. Or they're going to try to sue the school. They're going to do all these things. They say that's the way that black child who has one parent, that's what they should have. But they don't, so what am I supposed to do? Even though they could easily do a lot. They choose not to. And I think that is what you're talking about in the internal bias. If there's a white child with a disability or a learning issue, a reading issue, ADD, ADHD, they want to meet them where they are. And when they have a single parent, they still want to compensate for them. They want to help them out. Whereas it's like society and teachers are looking for any reason to just go ahead and check out in terms of, I don't want to do anything for them. And so this is the funny thing too. Teachers know. I mean, there's a study by Deva Pager that turned out that a black man without a criminal record is less likely to be called back for a job than a white man with a criminal record if they have the same background, education, whatever. And so the entire private sector, which is the majority of the American economy, will likely call back a white felon over a black educated person. So you know this is happening. You know that when they get out of high school or if they go to college, they're not even going to be hired. And you know that this is what they're facing. And instead of preparing them more, you seek to prepare them less by saying it's their fault and their parents' fault. But how is it really their parents' fault when their parents are called back at a lower rate than white criminals? You were saying they don't have a job or they went to prison or they did something illegal. Meanwhile, they can't sustain themselves economically, not through their own fault, but because the private sector is racist. And instead of considering that and saying, I need to do something more to help these children and to even influence the broader private sector of society, you instead wash your hands of them and say, their parents don't have a job. And then meanwhile, a woman may be a single mother because a man had to go to jail because he has to try to find some sort of revenue because people won't give him a job because he's black. So, and that's the other thing too. Economically, people are more likely to do what their parents did. So what the education level is of your parents or even a similar sector of work is what you're likely to do. And you're likely to follow in their footsteps. So meanwhile, when black men are not given the opportunities to have jobs, now you have, even if they have a college education, so now you have people who are less likely to get education or less likely to have a prestigious high-income job. And so what are these kids supposed to see as their option if they do succeed? Where's the internal motivation versus when a white child does well in school, they're going to automatically be going to college. They're going to automatically be getting jobs that they probably don't even deserve because of their white privilege. And so these are all the realities of what, to me, these are the realities of what Coates felt as a child. He feels it. He knows that it's there. He says he couldn't envision himself traveling to France. And he did, but he happens, and he also comes from, like, I think parents that maybe were scholars or something like that, or professors or something like that. So he was able to go, but the people that he grew up with, I doubt, have been able to go. You know?
Right. Yeah, I think it's, even at a scale of, like, being a teacher and seeing the studying abroad, which kids can typically go to study abroad,
Yeah.
Not the kids, not the Latino kids and not the black kids. It doesn't matter if they are fluent in the language. Even the kids who are Latino, when they're taking a Spanish class, they put them in, Spanish for native speakers, and they're still averaging like a C or a D in a class. And when the school is going on a trip to study abroad for a week or a week and a half, you don't see those kids going. They're not the ones that are going. It's the white kids that get to go because their parents can easily dish them a $2,000 check to go ahead and spend a week in Spain.
Yeah.
But I think that I think one of the things that earlier we were talking about, reviews where they were saying like his text is a little bit is more disempowering and makes readers of color feel like, hey, there's nothing that we can do, and I feel like that's not what he's doing. I think it's the same thing as like diagnosing what something is. The only way you can cure cancer or cure someone from being ill is to call it, name it what it is. Don't say, well, you have cancer, but I believe that it can get better. You need to say, well, this is a cancer, and here's the severity of it, and here are the amount of days that you can live. Let's call it what it is, and then let's work from there. And I feel like, which sounds morbid, I know.
No, I would even extrapolate that analogy. It's like, it's almost like you have two cancer patients, one's white, one's black. And with the black person, you're saying, you have cancer, but if you really, 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 really hope, you're going to go ahead and maybe be cured. Mm-hmm. And then if you're a black person who says that white patient over there has cancer and you're giving him cancer medicine, you're giving or him or her cancer treatment, you're doing all these things, can I get the same thing because it looks like it's going to make a difference? Mm-hmm. And when you bring something up like that, obviously that would be something normal there. Mm-hmm. But if you bring that up in society of, hey, those white kids are going to better schools. Long ago, the schools were not integrated. The integration was protested. Can't we get equal education? But when you bring that up because it's the cure, they say you're being racist. Right. And so don't look at the white person getting the cancer treatment, okay? You just focus on you who doesn't get the treatment, and you just need to hope. Right. It's not the treatment that makes a difference. It's the hope. Right. Okay? You don't have the same thing right now, but if you continue to hope, somehow, some way, that hope is going to go ahead and magically manifest this cancer treatment for you. Right. And it has nothing to do with us. It has nothing to do with the doctors. It has nothing to do with the institutions of medicine. No. It's up to you to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think so just like what I think about that, or what I want to add to that, is that it's more, he's less trying to sugarcoat it for what it is, the brutality of what people of color are experiencing in America, and more so just saying, this is what the problem is, and yes, we need solutions, but hope and, prayer, not to be even like, and unfortunately prayer sometimes, like when it comes from the religious aspect, is being used as like a caveat for, this will help us. Let's pray and let's have a moment of silence. And as nice as that is not what's going to solve, our problems. And if anything, if people want to bring in prayer, it's like prayer without action or faith without action is like, what is it? It's meaningless. And it makes me think of, and I always think of Ida B. Wells. So when she acknowledged the lynchings that were going on, she didn't tell her black friends, hey guys, here's what you need to do to avoid getting lynched. No. She named it and said, you guys are being lynched there's no reason. They're lynching you because they don't like that you're running a successful business across the street. They don't like that the white women are actually falling in love with you. How dare those white women fall in love with black people? She said that is the problem. She didn't say, okay guys, here's the steps to take in order to not get lynched if you own a business across the street from a white man. Because the problem isn't that they own a business. The problem is at a larger scale with the society, with the structure. And so if anything, that is what got her, kicked out of the South, kicked out, period. Because she was like, I'm not going to sit here and dance around the reality of what the problem is.
Yeah, I think what is perhaps misread about quotes, is in terms of, because they're saying disempowering. So what I think Coates is actually saying is the racism that black people are experiencing is not going to be solved by black and white people, because it is not a black and white problem. It is the problem of white people. The racism that is married to the power of the white people is what is causing this oppression, and it is them who have to change. And I think that is what the critics are reading as disempowering. That, you're saying we can't do anything? So it's almost like you want to believe you can do something. But if the way Coates is identifying the racism as essentially a white problem because the institutions were created by white people, perpetuated by white people, and even it gets internalized into people of color. That they are the ones that have to change. It's 100% their problem. They're the ones that have to change it. They're the ones that have to overturn the Supreme Court case Milliken versus Bradley. Black people, and so this is the thing. So the reason why I think it's not disempowering is because it doesn't mean black people can do nothing. But if black people and even people of color and even people that are white who want to change it, if they realize that it's not about black people trying to do less drugs, black people trying to do things for better jobs, black people trying to do what the white man tells them, it's not about that. Instead, if we can all focus on changing the institutional, on an institutional level, and getting white people to accept that they're the ones that need to change it, if we can focus on that, even though we don't know how to do that yet, that is what possibly can change everything.
Right.
Versus us, or people of color, looking less Latino or looking less black or looking less threatening or sagging your pants less or
not wearing your hair in a certain way, straightening your hair, cutting, don't cut your hair. I think that makes me think about the reason why he uses the example of the two examples of this whole, he doesn't want to teach. What I like is how he intertwines. It's like giving his son a lesson while at the same time kind of it seems like he's trying to find closure in the Prince Jones killing. I feel like that's what I get from it because at the end he kind of closes out with that. But it's like he wants his son to take away, like, I'm not telling you, son, to be twice as good, to be more than who you are. Be a human being, be in this world, try to figure out how to live in it. I don't want you to try to fall into this trap of trying to please white people or white privilege or whatever he says it should be called. Yeah. Be yourself. And he uses the example, he kind of like interweaves, I don't know if that's the right word, but he weaves throughout the text the Prince Jones case. Yeah. Prince Jones went to affluent schools, mother was a radiologist, he did everything right, everything according to the book. And some might even argue that he, maybe wasn't who he truly wanted to be until he went to college, until he got to go to Howard University and be around other people of color. But even then, he was still murdered, still wrongfully murdered. And he did everything according to American standards. Yeah. So then what's the point?
Yeah, and because I want to say that he says that it was a black police officer who killed him, which again, he's trying to touch on the institution that produces it. And you mentioned something earlier before we started recording about it's not, the police aren't a bunch of pigs.
Oh, fascist pigs. Yeah. It's less that they're fascist pigs. It's more so that the majoritarian, he says, are pigs. That's where the problem is. Because the majoritarian is what fuels the fascist pigs or the people to create. And to make it even matters even worse, they use people of the same color. We're like, well, what are you saying? It's a black officer. It's a Latino officer that killed him. And even when I looked at the picture of DeRay,
DeRay Meckinson, maybe?
Meckinson. I feel like the cop that apprehended him was actually a black cop, and I feel like they do that, which is what they did with the Holocaust. In order to beat the Jews, they took the other Jews who were actually following through with the Nazis to be the ones to do the dirty work. Mm-hmm. So that way you can try to be kind of confused.
Again with the hand washing,
right?
Yeah, I wonder if now that I think about it, with the hand washing, it reminds me of Pilate, I guess. When he says, and then wash its hands of him, that society washes the hands of him, saying he should have stayed in school, which is just like Pilate before Jesus, where he's saying, there's some people who say, oh, Pilate's not guilty, but in reality, is Pilate not guilty? Just because he washes his hands of it and allows the rest of the society that to kill Jesus doesn't mean that he's innocent, which I personally don't believe he's innocent. Neither do I believe the police or the school system or the society that washes their hands of a black death is innocent.
Yeah. So, any other closing thoughts?
I think I did have one, but I'm forgetting it right now. You were talking about the institutions, the majoritarian. Oh, and that it's a reflection. You mentioned that it was a reflection of the police are a reflection of the society.
Right.
that we live in,
Right.
and that they can't escape that. And the same thing too. Imagine being a Black or Latino officer, and you're like, go over there and arrest D.A. Mickinson, who's doing nothing wrong, and you're like, no, thank you. You know, and it's the other thing too. This whole idea of, I mean, this is where 2 shootings just happened back to back, and there's been protests, and people were being arrested while protesting. That I forgot what I was going to say about the social pressure. I lost it.
You were saying that.
Well, maybe I'm forgetting, but I got something else. So schools are segregated. Achievement gap is created by schools with little resources, and the schools are, again, any school that is segregated, no matter if it's by a law on the books or if you allow people to do it on their own, it is only to have unequal schools. So meanwhile, you produce these people who are not equipped, or they're not on an equality educationally as their white peers. So therefore, who are already the majority. Therefore, the private sector is going to hire white people and hire less Black people. So now they have less skills, they're less employable, and they have less jobs, and they have less income in the jobs that they do receive. And if you ever commit one crime, you're even less hireable, and now you have 0 options. So you have to, let's say, sell CDs, or in the case of Philando Castile, he had a job. He worked in a cafeteria. He went through all the things that the white people told him to go through: get a concealed weapon, the license to carry a concealed weapon, and he was still shot 4 times in front of a 4-year-old. And so there is the big desire for. There's obvious. So Coates is pointing out all these different institutions that continuously hinder and create influence Black people to, let's say, commit crimes or use drugs at the rates that they do, which doesn't cause them to. Actually, that's the big difference. The society keeps saying it is the Black person's fault who caused themselves to be murdered. But what Coates is saying is it's the opposite. It's the institutions that continue to try to, what does he say? Qualify? Where he says, that it sanctions and justifies their destruction when they're on the streets by either other Black people or the police. And I think that's what he's pointing out mostly. Anything you want to close out with?
So I think that I feel like where I stand in terms of reading and, analyzing Between the World and Me, I don't feel like, even when I finished reading it, before I even read any of the reviews about people feeling like it was disempowering, I did not feel that at all. That was not my initial reaction. As a matter of fact, when I read the reviews, I was like, whoa, I didn't. And I guess because one thing we've been trained to read the text for what it is, hear the author and hear what they have to say first, and then gather your thoughts on it. And I don't feel like it was disempowering. I felt like it was a complete opposite. I felt like it was empowering, and more so, here is the information, here are the necessary tools that you need to kind of move forward, and then let's just keep going. Let's keep going from there. And I think, and like, I'm really glad, because I feel like it's giving even people at a higher level, like Sonia Sotomayor, she's quoting Coates in her dissent to say, like, guys, let's look at our laws. Let's look at why there's a problem here, and let's go from there, because we have to do something at a larger scale to change this. As attorney, generals, and as the justice system. So I felt like at least it left me feeling more like, okay, someone is giving me the okay to not have to be twice as good. I can be my own person, and I can, you know, do, you know, what I want to do or be who I want to be and feel comfortable in doing that and not feel like, you know, and if people make me feel like I need to do more, I can just at least be like, no, that's just more of a thing that you think I should be doing. Um, so those are just kind of like my thoughts on that.
Yeah, that made me think of how he talks about Martin Luther King. So what he specifically talks about Martin Luther King when he speaks about him is the nonviolence. So, and what he points out is that who loves Martin Luther King and who loves to point him out is white people. White people love to say, black people, you need to get your freedom through nonviolence. That is your option. We kill you, we murder you. As a result, we lynch you, we do all these things. And as a result, you need to respond with nonviolence. Because that's the best you're going to do. Because you know why? And the implication is we're going to kill you more if you do not respond with nonviolence. And Coates looked a lot to, where he talked about the difference between Martin Luther King and Malcolm X. And what he said is, when he looked at the world that he lived in, it looked more like what Malcolm X was describing and the world looked less like what Martin Luther King was describing. And so, to me, Martin Luther King is associated with hope, with hoping for the better future, with the dream. And it's hilarious because he actually talks about that white people are living in this dream, the most gorgeous dream, that if they accept that they're racist and they're destroying black bodies because society, let's say the white consciousness of American society is racist, and that's why black bodies are destroyed, then even accepting that happening one time will wake them out of this most gorgeous dream. And so interestingly, it's consistent with Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. I have a dream. And the thing is, it's a dream, it's a hope, and it's an aspiration. There's nothing wrong with that. It's good. However, if that's not the reality and the resistance is coming from the white majority society, then you need to face reality. And his reality is not going to come true. The reality is what Malcolm X had been describing. So if that's the reality, you need to accept that and try to address it. And that to me is empowering. That to me will help. If a white person can realize that, they can be empowered to do something instead of thinking, keep dreaming, keep hoping, it's going to happen. It doesn't depend on me. And that aspect I find empowering. But I think the fact that Martin Luther King has been associated with his hoping equaling empowerment, that you have to kind of, if you reject that, people are sitting there and feeling, oh, disempowered now. Because you're taking away that, I need to have that hope. I need to have that dream where black and white children are playing together. And so the funny thing is, his dream is black and white children playing together, but meanwhile, you allow for schools to be segregated and you desired for them to be segregated. For example, in Detroit, where white people need to move to different sections of the city so that black children cannot attend schools with their children. When there's integration that's going to happen in Boston, white people go out and they protest that in the 70s after Martin Luther King is already dead. So after he's already dead and white people do not allow their children to play with black children, then you need to face the reality that that's not going to happen unless you do something about it. And that Malcolm X's, his perspective was, or his view of reality, let's say, was a little more accurate than Martin Luther King's. Any more closing thoughts?
No, I think that's basically it. You're gonna be able to edit some of this, right?
I will edit nothing.
One other thought, and this might just be cut out, is it makes me think of teaching where the kids are frustrated when they don't have very specific concrete tools to help them improve as writers, as readers. They will get frustrated if you're like, you just need to read, try harder. You just need to try writing more, try writing harder. But if they don't have any specific tools that are going to help them improve, anything specific that they can actually remember as they are, trying to produce a piece of writing. If they don't even understand the basics of an outline of an essay, if all I say is just write and then hope that it'll get better.
Yeah.
That is the most frustrating thing, especially for adolescents, because they're like, what are you talking about? I do not understand what specifically I can do and how can I use this to, give me something concrete. What can I take away? And so I feel like Coates he gives us something to take away. And I feel less like I want to smack myself in the face when people say a bunch of cliche, trite things that are like, and don't get me wrong, I'm not an MLK hater.
Hey, at the end of the day.
I'm not an MLK. No, what I have to say, I did start to not like him in college, but because I learned some real facts about how the civil rights movement actually happened, and that it was actually mostly women who led the movement, and they just, because of the gender biases, they need to put a male in the forefront in order to make it credible. But that's besides the point. That's a tangent, so cut this out.
No, we will, because otherwise some white man will be like, see, black people cause black problems. I dismiss everything else you said.
But anywho, I don't have anything else to say. I'm hungry.
Well, it reminded me of, again, it's like the perfect analogy of what he keeps getting at over and over, which is like, imagine you have a class full of black children and a second class full of white children, and they both need help with the essay, but with the black children, you say that, what you just said. You just need to hope. You just need to try harder.
Yeah.
Just be, you know what I mean? Just try.
Be better.
Just be better. Just, they do 2 hours, you got to do 4 hours. And then to the white class, you say, what do you, you talk to them about writing a thesis statement. What is the point? You explain what the point of a thesis statement is. You make sure they understand it on their own. You make them understand that you need to have supporting evidence. You need to have quotes. They need to be consistent. They need to be logical. They need to be elaborated on with their own thoughts. They need to be unpacked.
Right.
You explain all that to them, and then let's say you go back to the black class and they say, hey, can you teach us about thesis statements? Can you teach us about unpacking support? Can you teach us about having evidence in our essays? And you're just saying, hey, that's not for you. Okay, right. You don't get that. It's not what makes the difference. Right. Trust me, I know. I'm the teacher. Right. I know that me telling them that is not going to help them be any better writers than you guys. You guys just need to be better. You just need to hope. You need to try, but you're not going to get any of these tools.
Right. Right.
Which is very frustrating. Which would be very frustrating, let's say.
Yeah.
So, in closing, we give Ta-Nehisi Coates' book a 4.95 out of 5 stars, consistent with Amazon's rating. I personally do not really agree with critiques from Randall Kennedy, though obviously he's a scholar who has contributed massively to empowering black people, I'm assuming.
And I think I don't fully agree with Michelle Alexander, though I appreciate her questioning. I like how she's like, I don't necessarily agree with this, but maybe that's a good thing, because that, I feel like that gives room for growth for everyone, because yes, Michelle Alexander is known for a very great text, but she also acknowledges through her review that she's someone who's willing to learn and appreciates Coates, because the reality of our situation is there are not a lot of black men writers who have the platform that Coates has right now. And so we should take it and run with it as much as we can. And, lift him up as much as we can, because we don't really have that many voices out there.
Yeah, and actually one thing I would say too, we didn't really touch on his prose, because his prose are, I think, very well crafted. One person said it reads like one of his articles, but I read the reparations expose, I suppose. I don't know if that's consecutive articles on the case for reparations, but it doesn't read like that. It reads a lot crisper. It's a lot more concise. It's ideals are packed. Multiple ideas are packed within single sentences. He doesn't really waste words,
which is interesting, because while you could appreciate that, or I could appreciate that, Michelle Alexander wished for more elaboration. So it's funny, because some people will mock, and Morrison's probably like, this is perfect.
Yeah.
Because she likes less words to kind of get to.
Yeah, and I think it's a thing. He is writing literature. He knows he's writing literature. He wanted to be a poet, but he always says he only writes bad poetry. So he instead writes in prose. So he produced a piece of literature, but it seems like some scholars are looking for it to be some sort of magnum opus, or whatever it is called, I forget how it is, on critical race theory or whatever. As though this should have been, he should have just taken 10 years and wrote this book, which would have been the second book, and skip the acclaim, or skip the fact that it's a novel, or skip the fact that it's accessible to, let's say, the average white reader, versus, critical race theory, who nobody reads. Mm-hmm. So I think in terms of literature itself, as a novel that stands alone, it will stand the test of time with everything that is in it. It has plenty of data and delves into that very much in terms of what a journalist would find. Oh, and something else. The scholar that I mentioned, who is a law professor at Harvard, Randall Kennedy, is saying that it doesn't feel like the novel elaborates enough. However, Ta-Nehisi Coates is a journalist who is educated and who has been writing for, 10 or 20 years. And this is what, let's say if he does fall short and doesn't know enough about it to elaborate, and that's why he has a lack of understanding. It's his job to invest. He's been investigating these things and being paid to do it as his job. Mm-hmm. So if him who is educated, if he does only find this evidence and this data that isn't enough to be comprehensive, what hope does the average black person or the average white person have in understanding how all of these different institutional factors that oppress black people? Mm-hmm. What chance do they have of understanding even half of what he has understood? Yeah. So if anything, I think Randall Kennedy fails to consider the reality of a person who has the ability to know more about these issues than the average person doesn't know enough, means that without everybody having information about this, that this is one of the ways that the institutions are perpetuated. And communique.
This ends episode 1.
You have been listening to De-oppressing the Marginalized Literary Canon. And you have been listening to Azinza and Tlatoani discuss the book Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Thank you for joining us.